from Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, if you bought the Sunday newspapers yesterday, you could hardly have failed to miss the story about the founder of Leave.EU and, indeed, his head of communications, Andy Wigmore. Banks and Wigmore accused of having serial meetings with the Russians, in fact, being tools of the Kremlin, and some say perhaps possibly even agents for the Kremlin. Accusations have been rife now for 18 months. That the Soviets, the modern Soviets, intervened heavily in the Brexit campaign, maybe even funded the Brexit campaign. A lot of things have been said under parliamentary privilege by many MPs with all sorts of accusations and even try to drag me into the middle of all of this. And I thought, well, given that tomorrow there is going to be a meeting chaired by Damian Collins MP, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and that Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore are going to appear tomorrow, and they've pretty much kept their silence since those newspapers yesterday, but their first interview is here with me on LBC, and we're going to try and get to the bottom of page after. You may have read it yesterday. There are gold mines involved, former generals in the British Army, and it was always a bit like a James Bond thriller, but the accusations were there, and they were very, very clear. So, good evening, Aaron Banks, Andy Wigmore.
Nigel. Thank
you for joining me. I'm going to start with you, Aaron. So, the story is that you met the Russian ambassador back in 2015 and had what you described as a boozy lunch. What qualifies as a boozy lunch?
Well, we had about, I think, 4 shots of Stalin vodka, brandy, wine. We were pretty trolleyed. I think the ambassador was probably in a worse state than we were, frankly.
But why were you there? What was he after?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. We were at the UKIP conference in Doncaster, and we were approached by a Russian observer, and he said, would you like lunch with the Russian ambassador? So we said, of course.
OK, and
you've got to remember, this was before the witch hunt started.
Oh,
so
yes.
So it was before all of the kind of, dramatic,
Certainly Russia was there were not the accusations against Putin's regime that there are today. But one meeting, and then the Sunday Times yesterday says that actually there were 3 meetings, and commentators say, well, Aaron Banks wrote a book called The Bad Boys of Brexit. He talked about the boozy lunch, but didn't mention the other meetings. Why?
Well, it's a strange sort of conspiracy when you wrote about it in your own book, isn't it? I mean, if you were trying to keep some sort of James Bond conspiracy with a Russian secret.
Well, you read about one lunch, yes.
But of course, the book's timeline finishes with us in Mississippi. You might remember you did a, big big speech to the Republican, rally there, and eventually, if you remember, the book finishes at that point. So actually, the second meeting with the Russian ambassador was after that, and it was after our meeting with Donald Trump.
So how many meetings in total with the Russian ambassador were there?
There were 2 lunches and 1 cup of tea where I was introduced to the businessman with the project to consolidate the Russian gold mines.
OK, so the embassy kept in touch with you?
Yeah.
And were keen to see you again, and there was the proposal of a gold mine, a Siberian gold mine deal, which people might say to themselves, well, was Aaron Banks not using the Brexit campaign to try and further his business interests?
Well, not really. I mean, we went there to have this lunch with the Russian ambassador. We had it after Trump. He was interested in the election of Trump. When we'd had the original meeting relating to Brexit, he was fascinated by the Brexit campaign. In fact, he thought that it wasn't going to happen. His advice, what he said was, I don't think Brexit's happening.
So after Brexit and after Trump, you have the second lunch. The book doesn't mention it because the book finishes before. Correct. I understand that completely.
No, we're not politicians.
But 3 days after we met President-elect Trump as he was, you met the Russian ambassador. And people would say, well, were you reporting back?
Well, not really. We had a very pleasant lunch with him that lasted 6 hours, and of course he saw a picture of us on the golden doors of Trump's apartment, and of course he got in touch with Andy because he had seen us splashed all over the newspaper.
So are you surprised when various journalists, The Guardian and elsewhere, say, well, actually, isn't it clear that what Banks and Wigmore were doing was reporting back directly to the Russians on the meeting that took place with President Trump?
Well, it's complete nonsense.
Is it?
I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, we had 2 lunches and a cup of tea. Yeah.
But he must have asked you about President Trump, his demeanour.
At the lunch, he was interested in Trump for the same reasons that he didn't, couldn't believe Trump had been elected. And this is part of the Sunday Times story, that we were asked for, numbers of the transition team.
The Sunday Times said that you'd admitted to giving telephone numbers of the transition team to the Russian administration.
Yes.
Hang on.
Why would you?
Right, so you need to put some context onto this. If you remember, which you do, when we actually went to Trump Tower, it wasn't a planned event and it wasn't a planned visit. We went there to meet some people that we've got to know during the campaign. What then happened? There was a huge demonstration of 40,000 people coming down Fifth Avenue. We were in the building. The Secret Service locked it down. We were stuck in Kellyanne Conway's office for 5 hours. So during that period of time, I got talking to a girl who was on a transition desk, or a desk, and she said to me, "You're British, you might be able to help me." And she said, "Do you have a number for number 10 Downing Street? They've called and we don't have any contact with the British government. Can you help me?" So I did have a number for number 10 and I gave it to her. She then asked for a number of other embassies who they didn't have any numbers for. And why? Because there'd been no preparation by any of these foreign governments thinking that Trump would be elected. So that's a fair point. So I then asked her, I said, "What if someone wants to get in touch with you?" And she says, "Here's a number, you can give that to them." And I took that number. 2 days later, I was actually at Buckingham Palace. As my role as a diplomat for my country Belize, I go to these events and I met many ambassadors and high commissioners who'd seen my picture on the front of a newspaper. They asked me exactly the same question: how do we get in touch with the transition team? Why? Because none of them had done any preparatory work to try and meet or liaise with this new presidential team. So naturally, when we're in front of the Russian ambassador, he had said exactly the same thing. We did not expect Trump to win. He was very clear about that. And do you have a number?
Nobody did they?
No. Do you know a way that we can get in contact with him? Do you have a number? He asked that.
So are the telephone number or numbers that were given to, and you say many people asked for them, you were a serving diplomat at the time. Yeah. Was it one phone number?
One phone number.
Or was it numbers of individuals who were members of the transition? Just one phone number?
Just one phone number.
Okay.
And I handed that to him and I said, yes, this is a number. And I told him how I'd got that number. This was the girl sitting on a desk, a part of the transition team. So he took that away. He was grateful. "Thank you very much. Can I pass that back?" I said, "Well, yes."
Andy, you're going to be there tomorrow in front of this committee with Aaron, and, it's scheduled to last for 3 hours, although I believe that they've applied for an extension, so goodness knows how long this will go on.
Lunch with the Russian ambassador.
Well, that's a very good point.
We have stamina. We'll be fine.
But, Andy, you were very much involved as the communications director, very much involved in the planning of the campaign, and I know that Aaron put a lot of money into this campaign, but other people too put money into the Leave.EU campaign. Was there at any point Russian individuals or Russian businesses that gave money to Leave.EU?
No. Not one penny or ruble.
Not one. And Aaron, the same?
Absolutely.
Because that is the main I mean, the main allegation is that somehow Brexit was funded by the Russians.
See the genesis of where this all came from.
That's
there was a report written in America that was, that we actually challenged. It went on to CNN. It crossed over to the ocean. A couple of members of Parliament repeated this allegation with, parliamentary privilege, and this whole fake news narrative started to roll from it. But you've got to see in the context that there hadn't been a Russian witch hunt. It wasn't even mentioned. It was only when Trump won that there had to be a reason why he had won and Brexit had been.
But people say there's no smoke without fire, and that's what they say. And your situation, Aaron, is, I mean, you're even married to a Russian.
Well, I would say the Sunday Times article was 4 pages of smoke from a single match. It was ludicrous.
Okay, so tomorrow...
Yes.
And, you've explained to me, you've talked about the meetings, and I wonder why you didn't disclose those extra meetings, did you?
Well, I'm not a member of Parliament. I don't have a conflict of interest.
Or a register of interest.
Register of interest. I've met many people. I mean, even with Andy, we've met most of the Caribbean. In fact, I think we had a dinner where we hosted most of the high commissioners from the Caribbean to talk about Brexit.
We did indeed.
A whole range of people. Sort of focusing on Russia because it's convenient politically. This is a witch hunt.
Well, it seems to be quite convenient tonight for none other than Theresa May, who is backing calls that are coming from quite a lot of members of Parliament. Basically, she's supporting the line that there should be a full police inquiry into reports that you, Aaron, and you, Andy, had extensive contacts with the Kremlin.
Well, what is the crime? I'd like to know what the police are going to investigate. Lunch with the Russian ambassador? What are they going to investigate?
So the police knock on your door and want to interview you.
Well, I shall tell them exactly what happened, but where
Mind you, we're going to tell Damien Collins exactly what happened.
Where is the evidence that we took Russian money? There's no evidence.
So tomorrow, you appearing before this committee. You don't have to appear. You've accepted their invitation to go and do this. Aaron, you're going to face a lot of members of Parliament, many of whom are convinced that you're a bit dodgy, a bit shady. That something a bit unpleasant, a bit seedy about this relationship with, Russian mining billionaires and ambassadors, and I'm guessing you're in for a pretty tough time of it tomorrow.
I don't know. They might be in for a tough time of it.
Really?
Well, I read today that Damien Collins actually took had to disclose a donation from Roman Abramovich for corporate hospitality at Chelsea Football Club.
His birthday.
So, frankly, given that Abramovich's man was Putin's man in London, what the heck is the chairman of the committee that's meant to be investigating Russian, collusion influence taking corporate hospitality with a billionaire Russian?
Okay, well, it just goes to show.
Well, I'm sure he had a brilliant lunch as well.
That lots of us go to meetings, and some go well and some go badly. And as communications director, Andy, do you regret getting involved with the Russian ambassador at all?
No.
You don't?
No. I mean, part of my job. It just, if you looked in hindsight, would I do it again? If I had the knowledge that there was going to be some kind of witch hunt and hysteria about the Russians, I probably would have thought twice. But now, I can look back on it and think, well, there was a purpose. It was nothing to do really with Brexit. It was just part of the natural process of meeting people. I didn't think anything.
The ambassador did mention the day before he had lunch with Philip Hammond. Yes. It was very congenial, and that they had a lovely time
to talk about Brexit. So if Philip Hammond's allowed to do it,
but how are you going to convince people that you weren't actually, maybe inadvertently, but that you weren't actually passing information about the Brexit campaign, or indeed the Trump campaign or Trump's intentions, to the Russian authorities?
Well, we didn't have any information about the Trump campaign, so how could we pass it on? It was an observation, if anything. But you talk about our campaign. We weren't the approved Leave campaign. People sometimes seem to forget that in all of this. We were very much the provisional wing. We were operating very much with you, as you know.
Yeah, no, I know that.
And what we did was attack areas and go into areas of the country and subjects which the Vote Leave campaign didn't want to touch. So that is what we did as a campaign. Now, how we can pass that on and influence Russia and Russia influence that is beyond me.
But are you a person of interest to the CIA, Andy?
Well, I thought you were a person of interest to the FBI, Nigel.
Well, a lot of things have been said about all of us that have been involved with the Brexit campaign,
so one of the things,
or the Trump campaign.
So, Nigel, what are we going to do tomorrow?
But you're going to get, you will be accused tomorrow of acting wittingly or unwittingly.
Okay, so this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. We're going to submit to the committee a series of meetings that we had with the United States. And we became very aware and very sensitive, particularly after Trump won, and particularly after this Atlantic Council allegations came out, that our new friends we could potentially embarrass. So we actually got some guidance of a former head of David Cameron's chief of staff, who advised us it would be a good idea. We spoke to the governor of Mississippi, who advised us it would be a good idea to speak to the Americans and let them know exactly what's gone on. So there was nothing to hide. So I had a series of meetings with a very senior official at the American embassy here, not once, not twice, but a dozen times. And in fact, I briefed him on everything that had been going on, everything that we'd been accused of. And why did I do that? So they would know exactly what was going on. If they needed to speak to various authorities, they could. At least they had the information with them. I've got all the emails here. I will be submitting them with Aaron to Damien Collins so he can see them. There is also a meeting which we arranged, which you will know, with one of the bigger bosses of the American embassy, security services, and he met you. Did he not?
Yeah, no, I do remember meeting, the big boss man from the American embassy, and I was happy to talk to him about all of this. Although I'd not met the Russian ambassador.
Yeah. No, indeed.
To put that into context.
Frankly, we will be putting in front of the committee tomorrow the email evidence that we met the CIA or the senior people in the embassy connected to the political section many times, and let's hope that Damien Collins doesn't leak the information like he's done everything else today.
Well, that's quite a thought, but I mean, that'll be for you to battle out with him tomorrow.
Because frankly, Nigel, it's got the details of CIA and all sorts of different people, and if he wants to continue to leak the way he's done, he can.
Do you think, Aaron, your case aside, and I've asked you both about Russian money, contacts, meetings, was there beyond you? Yeah. Do you think there was Russian collusion either in the Brexit campaign or in the Trump campaign?
I think it's possible at a low level when we talked about these bots and these kind of, the things that the Russians are trying to do, but at a very sort of amateur level. I mean, I really think that the reason this is all coming out is because it's a concerted Remain campaign to kind of smear anyone involved in the Brexit campaign. We saw Jacob Rees-Mogg, didn't we, splashed over the front page of whichever newspaper it was, saying, Russian connections, tenuously because he runs a hedge fund that might have investments in Russia. No. It's a concerted campaign to basically attack anyone involved with Brexit. Now, what I would say to Damien Collins is, why have you called no witnesses from the Remain campaign and interrogated them? Why are all of the witnesses, useful for you?
So tomorrow, 10:30.
Yeah, sharp.
You're there before that committee. Can we expect fireworks?
Yes. We certainly can.
Well, it's a busy day, isn't it? Overnight, we've got the President of the USA meeting Kim Jong-un. We've got Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore appearing before the Department of Culture, Media and Sport Committee. And tomorrow night, crucial votes in the House of Commons. You've listened to what the two gentlemen have had to say. Do you believe them? Do you think there was Russian collusion during the Brexit campaign, or is it just a load of old nonsense? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively here on LBC, and the time is now 7:22. Well, you've just listened to Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore from Leave.EU, who've been accused of all sorts of things in yesterday's newspapers and face a parliamentary committee tomorrow morning on, did they collude with the Russians? Did it influence the Brexit vote? Let me know what you think. If you think, it probably did influence the vote, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or if you think, don't insult me, nobody, by sending me an email, is going to influence my vote, then text to 84850. Or maybe you've got more questions should be answered, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Well, the political fallout from those Sunday papers yesterday has reached even the Prime Minister today. To get a view on this, I'm going to go to Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, a fascinating interview with Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore. I just picked out a few of the top lines from that interview. Yep. That lunch with the Russian ambassador lasting 6 hours, 4 Stalin vodka shots, wine and brandy. The hangover must have been pretty monumental.
Well, I think in some ways, Theo, with the press coverage, they're still suffering from it, aren't they?
Absolutely. But onto the substantive points, an interesting line, Kellyanne Conway, Andy Wigmore saying that they were stuck in her office for 5 hours while Trump Tower was in lockdown during that meeting, with a photograph outside the lift. Of course, you were there, and that she asked for a number for 10 Downing Street. And of course, back at the time, there was a fear within Whitehall that you could... you, Nigel, could find yourself with some sort of ambassadorship to the Trump campaign, and that, in actual fact, that allegation stands up that line that the Trump were looking for a way into Westminster, a way into the Theresa May's operation, and that she had to go to Andy Wigmore of all Kellyanne Conway had to go to Andy Wigmore of all people in order to get it. And then on those allegations that somehow there was Russian influence, Kremlin influence over the Leave.EU campaign. And this is the key bit. You asked whether either men had accepted any money, Russian money, through companies or through the government itself, state money itself, and both of them denied that they had accepted any 1 penny or 1 ruble, describing the reports in the Sunday Times as 4 pages of smoke from a single match. And then a taster, of course, for that hearing in front of the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee tomorrow, when Aaron Banks said that they would be, both men would be submitting email evidence of contact with an officer from the Central Intelligence Agency, and then there was a swipe at Damien Collins, the chairman of that committee, that he might leak it. Well, we can expect fireworks, as both men said.
Yep, I think so. Theo, busy day in Parliament, all round tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow evening. And, of course, you know, they also mentioned the fact that Damien Collins received an invitation from Abramovich. Well, what it was actually from Chelsea Football Club, which is owned, of course, by Roman Abramovich. But I've no doubt that is all going to come up tomorrow. I think, you know, I know Aaron Banks very, very well, and Andy Wigmore. They're not politicians. They are people from the world of business, insurance mostly, but of mining too. And I don't think they're going to pull their punches tomorrow. I think it could be very, very interesting viewing. OK, well, on them, the conversation we've just had, the prospect of the meeting tomorrow, but more broadly, Russian collusion. Tell me, do you think Russian collusion influenced the Brexit vote? I certainly don't. In fact, there was more Russian bot activity supporting Jeremy Corbyn in the last general election than was ever involved in the Brexit campaign. It's for the birds, in my opinion. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It is now 7:30. As Prime Minister May joins calls for a police investigation into Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore's Leave.EU campaign because they had meetings with the Russian ambassador, I'm asking you whether you suspect Russian collusion influenced the Brexit vote. I think it's nonsense, but hey, what do you think? Julian, a new caller from Fulham. Good evening, Julian.
Hello, good evening, Nigel.
Welcome to the show. What do you think?
Thank you. Well, as I said to your colleague, I feel rather disillusioned about the whole thing. I voted for Brexit as part of a patriotic, what I saw as a patriotic duty. And now that I've read some of these terrible stories about, you know, this possible link to Russia, it really has made me question things.
Well, Julian, I would say to you that means that the Remainers, or the Remainiacs, those that want us to stay in the European Union, those of us that want a second referendum, if you're becoming disillusioned because of what you're reading, they're winning. They're doing their job rather well. And I say that, Julian, because they haven't produced a shred of evidence of any wrongdoing.
Well, not yet, but it is all a bit murky. I mean, you've got to admit, the person who broke the story was Isabel Oakeshott, who's actually paid by Aaron Banks, is in the employ of Aaron Banks, and she only went public when the Observer was threatening to break it. But, I mean, the whole thing, just as I say, it does stink to me, and it's kind of farcical that you are interviewing these two guys when, you know, you also have questions.
Oh, do you know, Julian, I have watched...
Where were you at the...
Julian, I have watched for years BBC interviewers interview people that they're godparents to, that they went to the same school as, and with whom they share the same political opinions. And Julian, you know, if you want to criticise me, you can, but I think I did ask fair and reasonable questions.
And the Trump campaign, it's all linked in. Just answer the question, what were you doing meeting Julian Assange?
LBC organised the meeting for me.
And what was it regarding?
Well, how many times, Julian, have I gone through this? I mean, I don't know whether you're a regular listener to this show, but regulars were going, oh my God, not again. I went because LBC organised a meeting. It was a view to doing an interview with Assange, who had not done a big interview in this country for a very, very long time.
But this is the problem. Everything is linked up. You've got the
whole world's linked up, Julian. We're all a couple of contacts away from each other. Of course we are. Julian, you're getting worried about what you've read. Have you seen a shred of evidence that there was any genuine Russian collusion in the Brexit campaign?
Well, I don't know. We need to follow the money, don't we? We need to find out how Leave.EU was funded. And there are question marks regarding that.
Who's asking those questions?
Well, hopefully the Select Committee tomorrow.
Well, do you know what, Julian? They will. They will. I'm sure they will. And maybe a lot will be revealed tomorrow. I have to say, I know Aaron Banks put a lot of money into Leave.EU. There's one other big businessman put a lot of money into Leave.eu. And a lot of small, ordinary folk put in their 10 quids and their 50 quids. I asked them explicitly whether any money was taken from anybody or any company with Russian links or influence, and they definitively said no. Julian, I'm sorry you're feeling disillusioned. The press are working. What does Jason make of it all in Sutton?
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Well, I think this is one of those times when Shakespeare trumps the Bible. Shakespeare wrote in, I think it was Merchant of Venice, it was the Bible that said, the truth will set you free. And Shakespeare said, the truth will out. The truth will certainly come out. There's no two ways about it. But whether or not it'll set these guys free, I think it's more likely to convict them when it all comes out at the end of the day.
Sorry, set them free. Are they, are you suggesting that they should sort of on bail at the moment, Jason? I mean, just because a bunch of MPs who are fanatical about Remain make a series of unsubstantiated allegations means nothing, Jason, in a free and fair society. Or do you think, Jason, are you one of those Remainers who thinks that any accusation is fair game?
Oh, my goodness. Did you just say unsubstantiated statements? What, do you mean like 40 million Romanians coming to live in my basement and next door to me? Do you mean like...
Did you see that? By the way, Jason, I tell you what, okay. All right, I tell you what. Okay, Jason, I told the country I feared up to 250,000 Romanians would come to this country in the first 5 years. Jason, I apologise to you. I got it hopelessly wrong. The official figures out 2 weeks ago said there are 411,000. I underestimated, Jason, and I'm really sorry for that. But this debate, Jason, is do you, Jason from Sutton, and clearly you're very, very, very pro-Remain, do you, Jason in Sutton, believe that there was Russian collusion in Jeremy Corbyn's election campaign last year?
Ooh, now there's a good question. I have no idea. I've not seen any evidence of that. But what we do know
and let me ask you the second question. Do you believe there was Russian collusion in the Brexit campaign?
I have absolutely no doubt. We know that in St. Petersburg there was a troll factory set up, and these people were paid by the state. This is fact. It's all available online.
Yes, Jason, and they spent far more resource on Jeremy Corbyn and trying to get him elected than they did on the Brexit campaign.
And do you know what they were doing, these people? They were planting stories that were retweeted by people like you and the Leave.EU campaign. Can you tell me anything that you said that was true and accurate?
Do you know, Jason, George Soros's lot were doing the same on the other side.
Diversion tactics. You can't answer a straight question.
So an American billionaire who is, of course, currently funding the campaign to get a second referendum, him doing it's fine, but people from other countries doing it's wrong. Is that right?
Didn't your Mr. Wigmore say tonight that while he was Director of Communications for the Leave.EU campaign, he was actually a diplomat for my country, he said, which was Belize?
Yep.
So he's not even here. Is he paying taxes here? Is he a British citizen? Who knows? He's a diplomat for what's effectively a foreign country.
Well, it is part of the Commonwealth, Jason, and they're our real friends. Or do you not think that?
So Nigeria's... Wait.
There's a great big exciting world out there, Jason. There's a great big exciting world out there. Maybe, Jason, the fact that he was a diplomat for Belize explains why he met so many other ambassadors. Possible?
Doesn't explain why UKIP and your cronies have been with the Russian ambassadors at their embassy and their homes and parties since 2012, does it?
I've never... Jason, I'm sorry, mate. I mean, I know this is all great fun, but I've never, ever been to the Russian embassy.
Your cronies. You're telling me that no senior representatives, no leadership of UKIP hasn't had involvement with the Russians since 2012, since the Euro elections? Really?
Well, I was the leader of it. I was the leader of it, Jason, for most of that time, and the answer is a big no. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm going to have to move on. Phil is a new caller from Finchley. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Nigel. I just wanted to say that I've been listening to the discussion, and I think historically, I think you've got to be rational about it. I think, would you agree that the Russians would, Putin in particular, would be more than happy to see Europe weakened? Divided Europe, a fragmented Europe makes Putin and Russia stronger. Would you at least agree with that?
Well, a weaker America.
Would you agree that,
a weaker America, Phil, makes Putin potentially stronger. A weaker China potentially makes Putin stronger.
No, but the question for you is, do you agree that Putin and the Russian government, the oligarchs and the rest, would want a divided Europe? If they do, clearly they would, whether they sponsored it and there was collusion in the sense of money or whatever else.
I think, Phil, the truth of it is...
Would you agree with that or not?
I think the truth of it is... I think, Phil, the truth of it is that Putin's Russia sees the European Union as a threat. And the reason is that, and the reason is very clear, that the European Union is very keen on continued eastward expansion, and they see that as a threat, particularly as the EU now wants to militarise. So Putin has no love for this European Union. That is certainly true, Phil. But
would you also agree that Putin has an issue with the European Union in the sense of its power, in the sense of the European Union trying to promote key components of democracy, key components of the rule of law, and the other areas which are totally at odds with Putin?
The issue is, Phil, the issue is expansionism. The issue is expansionism, and of course he is. But Phil...
So if you give me that point, then clearly you can actually argue that there is potential for the Russians to see an opportunity. And we only got to look at history. We've been doing it around the world. The Americans have been doing it around the world. And if they take the opportunity of weakening Europe at any opportunity...
Well, isn't this the funny thing? Isn't this the funny thing? That actually the truth of it is...
Nigel,
the truth of it is we've all been interfering in other people's elections all over the world for centuries.
You're doing Putin. You see, the difference between you and I is I actually did vote Remain, but I did not vote to leave the common market. I voted to leave the European Union. I did not vote to leave the common market.
Oh, so Phil, when you voted, Phil, were you unaware when you voted that leaving the European Union with a Leave vote also meant leaving the single market and customs union?
No, because I thought it would strengthen our hand. I thought the Europeans wouldn't allow us to do it. I thought Cameron was a complete waste of space. I think that if we threaten to leave the negotiating table, take a Trumpist approach, walk away, they come crawling back. I thought it would reinforce our position and strengthen our arm. Instead of that, you've got people running around setting fire to the house. I do not want to leave the common market. The people I work with...
Well, it's not a common market, but it's a single market, isn't it?
But I want the common market. Margaret Thatcher introduced a single market.
And then regretted it to her dying day.
Within the customs union.
Phil, the point is... Phil, we are deviating here, but I just make this one point very quickly to you. Every single leading player who spoke for the Leave side and the Remain side said the consequence of a Leave vote would mean leaving the European single market.
Well, not as far as where I'm coming from. Because
all right, fine. No, Phil, I can't.
Nigel,
I can't argue with you. I had this yesterday. Go to lbc.co.uk, see the quotes that were given by the leading players on both sides in the campaign. It could not have been clearer. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:46. There are big votes in Westminster tomorrow night and on Wednesday night. These are the amendments the House of Lords have sent back, part of the government's European Union withdrawal bill. They are crucial. They are key. They're important. The Prime Minister's position, he could even rest on the result. So, of course, it's no surprise the timing of all of this, is it? That's why the Sunday papers were full of it all yesterday. That's why we're reaching almost hysterical fever pitch in Westminster with accusations that the Leave side were funded by the Russians, that we colluded with the Russians. I think it's nonsense. Some of you are genuinely worried about it. Meanwhile, in Singapore, that little country, which, by the way, when it broke away from Malaysia, people said it was too small, it wouldn't be able to cope on its own, and it's become per capita just about the richest country in the world, and in many ways, one of the most influential. The White House have said tonight the plan is Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim will meet, their initial greetings will happen at 1 o'clock in the morning, our time. There'll then be a one-on-one meeting between the two, at which nobody else will be in the room. Nobody else will be in the room. It will be just the President, Trump, Kim, and 2 interpreters. They will meet. There will be no minutes taken of that meeting, which international diplomats say is a total disgrace. But hey, Trump doesn't do things conventionally. Then there will be expanded meetings with other representatives, followed by a working lunch. Beyond that, we know nothing. Trump has said he will no doubt form his initial opinion of Mr. Kim and whether he can trust him pretty quickly. He said, in fact, it might take as much as a minute for him to decide. And is Trump tomorrow going to storm out dramatically, saying it's all a waste of time, or is it going to be a success? Is there going to be some progress? I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, whatever your opinion of Donald Trump, and I know from all the phone-ins we do that he does elicit very strong views on both sides, I think just for once, shall we wish the both of them the very best for this meeting? Because, do you know, at the end of it, the winner won't be Trump, it won't be Kim, it'll be the world. So I've got my fingers very firmly crossed. Back to, did the Russians collude? Is it all nonsense? John is calling from Derby. Good evening, John.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for taking my call.
Not a bit.
Yeah, just before I ask the question I planned on asking, I would like to make a slight correction to something which was said in the last conversation. You did say that you at no point made any comment saying that nobody was saying that we'd be leaving the single market. But Andrew Adonis, actually, on his Twitter account, did point out a video, which, granted, it was prior to the referendum campaign, but you said that nobody is saying we should leave the single market, and also references to Norway, which is in the single market, were made as well. So, but anyway... No,
I've always wanted to leave... John, I've always wanted to leave the single market. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Look, whatever people's position...
That's not the point I was trying to make.
And when it comes to Boris, and when it comes to the others, they may have been supporters of a single market as cabinet ministers, but once the campaign proper kicked in, they were all very clear. Anyway, John, let's move on.
Anyway, what I would like to ask is, considering... also, I have a bonus question for Aaron, if he's still there after we finish this part. Is he still in the room, actually?
He's not in the room anymore, no.
Okay, well, I can ask you. I'll ask you on behalf as well at the end, if that's okay.
John, sorry, I mean, are you coming on to interview me? Is that what's happening here, or are you coming on to give me a comment about whether you think there was Russian collusion in the Brexit campaign, and if there is, why?
Okay, well, I'm trying to engage in conversation. My question actually is, considering all the concerns which many people have, and I think also you yourself have said that the negotiations are not going well. My question is, why is Brexit still happening? Why are we still leaving the European Union?
Because we voted for it.
And I thought you were going to say that, and I'm going to point out that's a cyclical argument. What you're saying is we voted to leave, therefore we're leaving. And I was actually asking for what is the reason we are leaving. What you're effectively saying is we're leaving.
It's undemocratic, it's expensive, it's run by nasty bullies, and actually we're getting out just in time as Eurosceptic parties and groups spring up all over Europe. It is, John, for us, the great escape.
I think you would find that in many ways the Parliament is not democratic because you're currently campaigning, as are many Conservatives, to not have a parliamentary vote on the final deal. And I
Parliament, John, gave the people the decision. The point about a referendum, it's a different, and the people have decided to leave. It couldn't be simpler.
The people have decided to leave in a vote 2 years ago, which we can debate whether it was binding or not.
John, let me ask you a question, because we really are, and I've got to move on because time is short. Do you believe, John, and you're clearly a very ardent Remainer, do you believe that there was Russian collusion with the Leave campaign?
I believe that there was enough influence from Russia, whether that be through the botnets on Twitter and Facebook, or through influence in British Parliament and other campaigners. Whether there was money transferred or not, whether it was done legally or not, I don't know, but I feel there was enough to make the 1.8% swing from Remain to Leave that would have caused the margin to change. And
John, you listened to Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore earlier. Do you believe them?
I believe that someone who got expelled for stealing lead from the roof of his school and somebody who doesn't pay taxes and was revealed in the Paradise Papers is not a valid...
Doesn't pay taxes? Doesn't he? I tell you what, John, I bet he's paid a few more taxes than you and me. Anyway, there we are. You've made your mind up. I'm going to go to Liz in Notting Hill to ask her. Liz, good evening.
Hi, how are you?
You're American, Liz. So did the Russians collude in the Trump campaign as well?
I mean, as a young American living in London, I've listened to Nigel talk about this a lot. And what I'm curious to ask you guys about is, my generation grew up on Facebook, and I've gotten in a lot of heated debates with people about if Russian collusion, that the Russians hacked into my Facebook and influenced my vote. And heated argument after heated argument, I'd love to hear kind of what Nigel would advise me to reply to my friends.
Well, I think we've reached a point, Liz, basically of hysteria. I think that the twin shocks of 2016, of Brexit and Trump all happening within 6 months of each other, is something that the establishment and those particularly with the financial vested interests just cannot reconcile themselves to, and so they're desperately trying to find a reason that these things happened. One, of course, is that we lied to everybody. Well, that's obvious. And the other is, it's the Russians. And Liz, nobody has produced a shred of evidence to say that the Leave campaign was financially backed by the Russians or that there was significant involvement in the Trump campaign. The whole thing, Liz, is an hysterical witch hunt. And I have to say, it is having some success because it clearly is worrying some people.
Nigel, because it's Carol Cadwallader here from The Guardian.
Oh, goodbye. No, listen, I'm not interested in talking to Carol Cadwallader of The Guardian, who's made a whole series of extraordinary claims about me and, of course, Julian Assange, when I was purely doing that for LBC. I've got time for one last quick caller, Greg from Edinburgh.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. I was just phoning to congratulate the Russians, really, on their forward planning and their strategy, and that they've had the EU behaving for years or decades in the way that it has been, so as to make us vote to leave.
In what way?
Voted. Well, it's obvious that the iniquities of the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy and the referendum vote in Ireland and France and Holland, that was all made up by the Russians.
Okay, I've got it. Right, the Russians have been engineering it for decades, yeah?
Yeah, it must have been. They must have been, because all that was obviously all fake news.
Greg, I love your sense of humour, and we needed a humorous call to finish all of this off, and thank you very much for coming on. Well, 10:30 tomorrow, it'll be Banks and Wigmore before this committee. It will be really rather exciting, I think, for everyone to tune in and watch, and no doubt there'll be some post-match analysis of that tomorrow evening, but equally, how Trump and Kim have got on is going to be the absolute key, and I'll finish by picking out this text. Hi Nigel, we wish President Trump and Kim Jong-un all the very best for tomorrow, and so say all of us. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow from 7. At 10 tonight it's Ian Collins, but up next it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.